Okay, Bury's match against Rotherham will be their fifth match called off. The EFL has now called off 5 games for Bury this season. They have until the 23rd of August to sort out their financial issues with proof of funds to pay off creditors and also keep the club running this season. Now, since I last recorded a video on Bury, and since I actually last recorded a video, figures have been released by Accrington Stanley that show that their game was cancelled cost Accrington Stanley as a club £100,000 that they were predicted to make on ticket sales, merchandise sales and other sales on that match day. Because that match was called off and suspended, Accrington Stanley are actually taking a hit, which means other clubs in League One and also in the Football League who would have played them in the League Cup are making losses. They're losing money. So this situation with Bury actually affects the wider Football League. It affects all clubs in League One, and should they have their game played in the League Cup, it could affect who they play in the next round as well. Now, Steve Dale has said he's provided proof of funds. The EFL are saying that he hasn't. There's been an open letter by players and club staff telling Steve Dale to sell the club. But the issues with Bury go back to the previous ownership. And also the EFL being asleep at the wheel. The EFL allowed the previous ownership to pass the fit and proper persons test when they actually didn't have the funds to run the club, rack up massive debts with the club, and then sell the club for a quid to a guy who's known to make companies go insolvent deliberately to then sell off assets. So the EFL allowed Steve Dale to become owner when clearly he had no intention of running a football club as a football club. His intention was to asset strip the club and its assets. That's basically it. So the EFL are also culpable for the situation that Bury find themselves in. The fact they keep suspending games means the club have no option, really, financially, to get out of the mess they're in. If you can play games, you can start paying off the debts that are owed, because you can start having an income coming in. While games have been called off and suspended, there's no income stream. So it defeats the object of the club proving that they have sustainability for the season ahead if they're not allowed to play games. Steve Dale is claiming that the EFL has a personal vendetta against Bury, which they do not. This is a guy who's trying to worm his way out of any responsibility, considering he bought the club for a quid. His objective is to asset strip, plain and simple. The previous ownership, yes, they did a racket. They overextended themselves, and again, that's also part of the fit and proper persons test. Also, making sure you live within your means with the financial fair play. The EFL have failed there again, so no one comes out of this winning. They all come out losers. And the fact that Accrington Stanley have said they're reporting losses of $100,000 for that weekend where their match was called off is a damning indictment on the situation. Now, on a side note, they have a game against Tranmere on the 24th. Yet, they have until the 23rd of this month to prove they're financially viable for the next 9 months. Highly likely that the game against Tranmere will also be suspended by the EFL. So, the Bury are facing the prospect of being kicked out of the Football League. Gig Lane is falling into disrepair. Players and club staff have gone unpaid for months. And the whole situation is a shambles from top to bottom. And the EFL have to take their share of the blame. The EFL are failing clubs up and down this country. I've said so before. I will say so again. The EFL have been regularly failing clubs for years. Now, on the Preston side of a club getting kicked out, it has happened before, way back in the 60s, with what is now Accrington Stanley, the forerunner of the club that is Accrington Stanley, were kicked out of the Football League in a similar situation and were replaced by Oxford United. And Boston United, about 15 or so years ago, were docked points for several consecutive seasons for financial irregularities as well, where they were cooking the books. And they've now since fallen out of the Football League, and I think don't even exist anymore as far as I'm aware. So there are precedents with the Football League punishing clubs for financial irregularities or, in effect, booting them out of the league because they cannot afford to sustain themselves. That is a last-ditch resort, but if other clubs in the Football League are now saying that they're losing out on money because they're not able to play games against Bury, that is also a damning indictment of the situation that the EFL needs to do more. The EFL probably could and should do more, and they could take ownership from Steve Dale. They could do a compulsory purchase scheme. They're the governing body. The FA and the EFL are basically washing their hands of the situation. Steve Dale should never have been able to buy the club for a quid. How they got past the fit and proper persons test is a joke. It says the system is flawed, and for all the riches of the Premier League and the Champions League places and those big leagues in Europe, the lower leagues are left to rot. They're badly governed. There's a lack of transparency and some really unscrupulous owners have destroyed some really historical clubs. Now, Bury have won the FA Cup twice in their history in the 20s. They finished as high as 4th in the old Division 1 in the 20s as well. They were a very, very good club in the 1920s, a long, long time ago. Obviously, in recent years, that hasn't been the case, and what is happening there now is criminal by all parties. Yes, the previous ownership did overextend themselves and overstep the mark a little bit, but the fact that Steve Dale was allowed to buy the club for £1 is a damning indictment on the EFL's policy of fit and proper persons test, which we all know is an absolute joke because anyone can buy a football club. It seems we've known for convicted criminals like the Oystons buy football clubs. Owners with no knowledge of how to run a football club, like the Venkeys at Blackburn. There's another example of a failure of what should be the fit and proper persons test. And a lot of clubs, from the Premier League downwards, there's a lot of clubs in the Premier League that have large amounts of unstructured debt. Even the great Manchester United is racked with debt, and the Glazers have been asset stripping that club for years. The FA, the Premier League, the EFL have all failed clubs for too long. The fact that Steve Dale thinks there's a personal vendetta against Bury by the EFL is a load of tosh. That's him trying to worm his way out of any responsibility of the fact that he's basically asset stripping and wants this club to be liquidated so we can sell the assets like the stadium and like the training ground for a profit. The previous owners should also be looked into why they were allowed to get into so much debt. And I feel sorry for the players and the club staff who've gone unpaid for months. It's the same situation at Bolton in a sense. Club staff have been going unpaid and relying on food banks. Players have been going unpaid. So this situation isn't just a Bury situation, it's a wider problem with governance. And the EFL, the FA and the Premier League, every governing body, the National League, have shown themselves time and time again that they are failing in the governance of the game. And clubs are allowed to be run almost criminally into the ground for personal profit. So Bury are facing expulsion from the Football League. They have just over a week in which to solve this crisis. They've now had 5 games called off, 4 league games, 1 cup game, and the situation rumbles on. That means Tranmere, they'll be looking at, will this game go ahead? I am surprised that the situation is allowed to get this far. That a guy can buy a football club for £1 in 2018, 2019. How a guy can buy a club for £1 and have no proof of finance. That just says to me that the EFL and the FA are not fit for purpose. And this is almost criminal what's going on here at Bury. But there you go. Thank you very much for watching. If you are a Bury fan, what are your thoughts on the situation? If you're just a football fan in general, what are your thoughts on the situation at Bury? Because this has become big news. A small club has become big headline news at the moment. And football's got a lot of questions to answer about where the money's come from for a lot of contracts, agents' fees, club ownership. A lot of questions to answer where the money train ends. Because since I would say in my lifetime, I've fallen out of love more and more with football every day. This is not an isolated problem at Bury, and the situation continues. So we'll see what happens. But thank you very much for watching. Please place your comments below, and I'll have some more videos for you soon.